Hello everyone. In this video, we're going to be covering how to generate Isopach maps within Danomics. So in our previous videos, we had already loaded data. So we've loaded our well logs, our tops, our headers. We had also brought in deviations. We had set up our projections, and we had set up zones as well. And then we generated our structure maps. If you've not yet brought in your deviation surveys, set up your projection, your zones, please do so, as we are going to be using some of that as part of this process. So if you also have watched the previous videos, you probably remember that in our CPI file, and I'm going to close a few files here, and I'm going to open up our petrophysical interpretation. You'll remember that we went through and we had made some Isopach maps here, and you'll remember that one of the problems that we had in these Isopach maps were that we needed to use zones. Because otherwise it's just going top to top, and if you're missing a top, you would have a zone that had a thickness that was too great. Well, within the petrophysics, we can set up zones, and we can do that by going Edit, Edit Zones, and we can say Customize Zones, Initialize from Tops, and we can set up our zones that way. And we can hit Apply, and now we have set up firm zones that go from Lewis to Teapot as opposed to Lewis to the next formation, right? So it goes Teapot to or Parkman to Lower Parkman to Sussex. And if we're missing the Lower Parkman, now that we've set up zones, it won't go from Parkman to Sussex. So we can bring that level of sophistication into the CPI as well, and that will now be included here. If we have set up a key well, and we have then brought and have processed our deviation surveys, we can also bring our deviation surveys, our process deviation surveys, into our CPI, and this will account for the any deviations in your well bores. So once we've done that, we can bring that in, and we can refresh this map, and it will go through the process of initializing, running, and then it will be finished, and we'll get this updated map available to us that will now be taking into account both the zone architecture that we set up as well as the deviation surveys that are included in there. Now, that is a pretty robust process, and you'll get very good Isopach maps out of it. However, there may be times when you need a little bit more sophistication. Specifically, what happens when you have a lot of highly deviated wells that are coming through at a high angle? You may not want to calculate the Isopach using the location at which you calculate that Isopach should really be not based on just the top of a zone or the bottom of a zone, but kind of the midpoint of that zone. And so we do have some more advanced tools that allow you to define just that. Now this is a relatively simple project, but I'll show you how to get started with those more advanced tools. One thing to note here is we just set up zones in our CPI using this process here. If you remember in a previous video, we set up zones, and these zones are separate. This is a separate zones definition file than we use in the CPI. So I'm going to close that CPI here. So now we do have an example flow set up for this. So we'll come down here to example flows. We'll expand that out, and we see O1C isopachmaps.flow. So we're going to right click, make a copy. I'm going to call this welcome Isopachs. Say OK. And I'm going to drag this into my welcome folder. And we'll see that this flow, I'll zoom in a little bit here so we can see it better together. We have 5 tools here. We have points input, tops to TVD, tops to isocore points, points to grid, and grid output. In the points input, it's looking for our tops. So we're going to choose our welcome project.tops. In tops to TVD, very similar to what we did in the previous two videos, we're going to select our well headers, and we're going to select our process deviations. Once we've done that, we'll come to our tops to isocore points, and you'll see that it asks us to identify the zones. Do we want to go top to top, or do we want to use the zones file? We're going to use the zones file, and then we just need to match the columns. Our depth column is Z, our API column is API, our formations are formation, and then it asks where do we get the top of the zone, the bottom of the zone, and the values to average. So we could define in here, so right now we have X and Y. We could use bottom hole locations, or we could look at an average of our surface hole and our bottom hole. A lot of sophistication could go into this. Now we are just going to, if you look at the settings here, it'll give you a tooltip, but we're just going to focus on using our X and our Y here. Now when we come to points to grid, it's asking us for a few things here. So once again, we're going to do this in XY space. We're going to choose X and Y. Our values column here is our thickness, so that's what we're going to zone. Now we don't need to apply deviations because we did that up here in the tops to TVD. But there is one additional step that we need to do here, which is we need to tell it how to do the grouping. We're going to say custom, and we're going to group by the zone. This way it says, hey, we're calculating zones. Let's go through and group by those. And then finally, we need to give this an output name. I'm going to call it welcome isopach.grid. And we're going to click run, or we could have also went flow run from the menu here. So this will go through the same process again of initializing, running, and then finished. Okay, this should only take a couple of seconds for it to run. There we go. We see that it's now finished. Now, if we come over here, we should see a new file here called welcome isopach.grid. And if we click on that, we can see that we now have the isopachs for all of our zones. Once again, this is using Danomics multi-grid formatting here, so we can see our zones, all of our zones here that we have isopachs for. Now, once again, we're going to go display this in our map here. So we'll come over here to our welcome project map. I'm going to turn off my structure grid, and I am going to choose property, and I am going to choose my isopach.grid. I'm going to choose the Niobrara as the zone that I want to display. We'll give that a different color palette here. I'm going to say add. And now I have my Niobrara Isopach displayed here on my map. All right, so that is how we can both generate isopachs that are slightly more sophisticated in our petrophysical interpretation, as well as using the more advanced tops to isocore flow tool that we used here. All right. In our next video, we're going to show you how to make these maps look a bit more sophisticated. See you then.